Masahir Batra Daf Pe Chimal Amud Aleph 7 lines down. We had a question against Rav Yosef from the Mishnah in Kilayim, but now maybe we'll bring a Mishnah that supports Rav Yosef. Or Razef Milo Tanami with Mishnah that follows Rav Yosef. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Amrim. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon both say, Hanoteat Kanamo, Shimone Amot Ashmone. Someone plants a vineyard 8 by 8, 8 amot apart. Mutal Avi Zerah Nisham can plant seeds there between the rows. So we see 8 amot is considered separate enough, like Rav Yosef. The Gemara says, Afilu Hachi Ma'aseh. The reason why we brought a story down versus mentioning this down is because the story is a stronger proof. The Gemara says, Bishon is according to Rabbi Yosef, 4 and 8, Ali Rabbi Shimon, because he follows according to Rabbi Shimon. Because we know Rabbi Shimon holds that regarding trees that are spread out, we also hold Rabbi Shimon's view regarding trees that are together. Spread out cases we mentioned earlier, that 8 amot part is too far. What's the case of Ritzufin? What's the case of them being together? The Mishnah says, a vineyard planted less than 4 amot apart, and Kerem is not considered a vineyard because they're too close. Rabbi Shimon is according to Rabbi Shimon. Chachamim say Kerem is considered a vineyard, even though they're too close. The things that are too close together are considered non-existent because they're going to get pulled out because they're unable to grow there. Right? It's too close to the other ones. We look at them as if they don't exist. Now, Rabbi Nachman, according to Rabbi Nachman, who holds 8 and 16, according to the Chachamim, we know Chachamim's halacha regarding spread out, like we saw earlier in the Mishnah. But where did Chachamim ever say regarding halachot of trees that are together? It's logic. We see from Rabbi Shimon that it was half of what he held. 8 minus half is 4. And so to Chachamim also 16 to 8. He combined the opinions. It's from 4 amot until 16. And I can have a proof according to Ravad. How close can the trees be together to be considered together for the land? 4 amot. How far can they be to be considered far? 16 amot. And if you do that between 4 and 16, you acquire the land, but and any trees that are inside. Therefore, if the tree dries up or it's cut, he has land to replant. If it's smaller than 4 or larger than 16, if you didn't buy them all at the same time, you bought them separately. As the you don't acquire the land. The smaller trees that are there, and therefore, eventually, the tree dries up or gets cut down, and he can't replace it, and he can't replant. But I have a question. When a guy measures, right? So he's saying, 4, 16, whatever it is, you're measuring from tree to tree. How are you measuring? Do you measure from the top part of the tree, which is narrow? Or maybe you're measuring from the wider part towards the bottom, right? It makes a big difference. That itself could be 2 amot bigger. The Gemara says, from a case of a grafted vine, you measure from the second trunk, the second thick piece, which means that we look at the middle point, right? So not the thickest part on the bottom, not the thinnest part on the top, rather somewhere in the middle. Next question. Let's say you sell a single tree, but that single tree had grown into 3 mini trees. All right, so one tree turned into 3 trees across a certain amount of land. Is that considered a 3-tree sale, and therefore you acquire land or not? Someone bends over 3 vines into the ground to graft them, and you could see where they were buried into the ground. If there's a space between 4 and 8 amot, they combine and considered a separate vineyard. And if it's not, if it's less than that space or below that space, it's not combined. We see from here that it's considered separate entities, even if they're considered from the same tree, and it would be a good sale to include land. If I sold 2 trees within my field, and a third tree on the boundary of the field, is that considered part of the sale, and therefore you get the land or not? Next question. They have sell you 2 trees in my land, and a third tree of mine that it's in my friend's field. Do you get land also or not? Because you can't get access to that part of the land. Teku. If there's a pit between one tree and the next, is that considered separation or not? What about the water pit? What if there's a public path in between? What if there's a stack of palm trees in between? Are these considered separations that you won't be able to acquire land or not? Teku. By minute, he'll be a question. Allah, it has been what if a cedar tree grew in between? So the question says, Allah, what do you mean it grew? If you bought the property and it grew there, then it belongs to you. So Ella, let's explain the following. If there's a cedar tree at the time of the sale, is that considered a blockage or not? Amar, he says, Kanai, he acquires it. It's not considered a blockage. You get the land and you get the cedar tree. How are the trees standing? We've previously mentioned triangle. Rav says a straight line, 3 trees in a row. Shmuel says like a triangle. According to opinion holds, Rava says it to be a straight line. So for sure, in the case of a triangle, which is easier to plow, then for sure acquired. Opinion holds that it's triangle that it's sold. But in the case of a straight line, maybe it won't be sold because because it's easier to plow around a straight line of trees, and therefore maybe the guy won't sell you the land. Versus the case of a triangle, maybe it won't work because it will be included because otherwise it's hard to plow. So right now we said, basically the difference maker is whether or not it's easy to plow. According to holds that it's triangle. My time, what's the reason? Because the only possible reason because it's hard to plow around it. Then after that's the case, if I sell 3 large thorn bushes, which is not necessarily hard to plow around. Does that mean that you'd also acquire the land? That's the only difference. Rashi says no, it's different. So basically, there's 2 factors. Number one, it has to be the concept of it's not only dependable on the fact, not the only criteria, whether or not it's hard to plow. Rather, the fact that you're selling trees is hashub and significant enough of its own right to include the property that's there as well. Okay. If I sell you the head of a large animal, you don't sell the legs. The head's not included. If I sell the lungs, the liver's not sold. If I sell the liver, the lungs are not sold. Regarding a small animal, it's different. If I sell the legs are included. If I sell the legs, the head's not included. If I sell the lungs, the liver is sold. But if I sell the liver, the lungs are not sold. There are 4 rules regarding sales, right? There's 4 rules regarding sales and regarding to what's considered a mistaken sale that I'm able to retract. If I sell you high quality wheat, then you see that it's actually low quality wheat. Since the buyer is the one getting messed over, he's getting cheated, he can retract. If I sold you bad wheat and then it turned out to be good wheat, the seller made a mistake, he can retract. If I supposed to sell you bad and it was bad, or it was supposed to be good and it was good, since it was a good deal, it was supposed to be, nobody can retract. If I sold you red wheat, which is like sunburnt wheat, and then you found that it was white wheat. I sold you white and it ended up being red. Or it seems I told you I was selling you olive wood and it ended up being sycamore wood. I sold you sycamore wood ended up being olive wood. Or if I sold you wine and it was vinegar, or I sold you vinegar and it was wine. In all these cases, both of them can retract. Why both? Because this isn't a clear-cut case of cheating. In a case where one guy's automatically losing, then that guy can retract. In this type of case, it's all about a person's preference and a person's needs. And therefore, in these type of cases where I'm selling you one thing, you're getting something else, it's almost a complete different item. Both can retract because it's up to both of their preferences. Okay. If I sold you something worth 5 for 6. So let's say easier to do hundreds. I sold you a $500 item for $600. Then the price went up. Now it's worth 8. Who got messed over initially? Lokeach, the buyer, and therefore the buyer can retract. The seller can't, even though now the seller wants to retract because he wants to work money. Because why? Because the buyer can tell him, because if you didn't try to treat me in the first place, you wouldn't have been able to retract. And therefore, now that you messed me over, you want to retract? Absolutely not. I'm not letting you win because of you trying to trick me. We could prove from our Mishnah. Yeah, if our case, Mishnah, if you sold something high quality wheat and it ended up being bad quality wheat, the buyer can retract which means the seller can't for this exact reason, even in a case where the price went up, and now the seller wants it back. Here's the next halacha. If I sold you something worth $600 for $500, Vezlu, and the price plummeted. Now is worth only 300. Minit ana, who lost, who was messed over, the seller, and therefore the seller can retract. Not the buyer. Because the seller can tell him, if you did not try to sketch me and cheat me by underpaying me, you would not have been able to retract. So not that you want to retract, you should be able to. No, it's your fault. You're lost. The price plummeted. I can prove my Mishnah as well. Now, in the case where I sold you something inferior ended up being good, the seller can retract, not the buyer, even if the price dropped afterward. The buyer can't be the one retracting. Like Mar says, if that's the case, we brought two halachot and proved it from our Mishnah. What's the Hiddush? Our Mishnah proves it. Well, what's the point of teaching me something that you can prove from our Mishnah? Just say the halachot from the Mishnah. Bezel. I says no. If you only follow from the Mishnah, you might think maybe in the case of Rav Chiza's cases, both of them can retract. Maybe it's considered a case like where it's up in the air. And regarding to the Mishnah, maybe the Mishnah is teaching you but that the buyer can retract when it was bad instead of good. Maybe you might think he could retract Mishum Tati Basuk says it because whenever the buyer is buying something, he always disparages it. Someone's trying to buy a house. Oh, I don't like this over here. I don't like this over here because he's trying to lowball. And therefore, maybe you might think because the person does that, he has a valid reason to now try to retract after. Therefore, Rav Chiz teaches you that he cannot retract. Baruch Amen.